Since July, tens of thousands of people in Thailand have been protesting on the streets demanding for political change. Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Chonburi, and Ubon Ratchathani are just a few locations where these protests have taken place. Although the country is no stranger to political protests, these protests in particular are very much different than the ones Thailand has ever seen before, and it revolves around a topic that many in Thailand had once never dared to speak of. To understand how the protests began, we need to look back at several events and issues that has led to it. Between 2013 to 2014, Thailand experienced a political crisis that saw a coup d'etat overthrow the then-ruling government led by Yin Lakshminawat. Prayut Chan-o-cha, a general of the Royal Thai Army and leader of the coup, established junta rule over Thailand. Prayut became Prime Minister, and by 2017, a new constitution was enacted, drafted by the junta. This is the 20th constitution Thailand has enacted since 1932. This constitution ensured that the junta would have a role on any future government after future elections have taken place. At the same time, it allowed the military to appoint a 250-member Senate, which now has a say in future governments as well.
I think it's important to remember that constitution was created by a constitutional draft committee whose members were appointed by the junta. The constitution was approved by a National Legislative Assembly appointed by the junta. The Senate that we have today was appointed by the junta. Who appointed the election commissioners and the members of the Constitutional Court, which interprets the different laws regarding the election? The junta. And so the rules of the game benefit the junta.
The Constitution set precedent for the 2019 general elections, with 500 seats up for grabs. Pheu Thai, the party previously in power before the coup, won the most seats with 136, and Palang Pracharat, a junta proxy party led by Prayut, despite him not officially being a part of the party, won 116 seats. Although Palang Pracharat came second in the polls, Prayut was successfully nominated as Prime Minister and formed a coalition government with votes from 249 junta-appointed senators and MPs from the Democrat and Boom Jai Thai parties.
The Constitution was very favorable to the military and the junta, and thus, no surprise, an elected government came into office which was very much supportive of the military. Palang Pracharat is a continuation of the 2014 to 2019 junta, but under different means, not under the institution of a military regime, but under what appears to be a democratic regime. But who are the real leaders of the Palang Pracharat party? The same people who were the leaders of the junta.
Future Forward, an anti-junta and pro-democracy party popular with youths led by Thanathorn Janggrun Rangkit, won 81 seats and over 6 million votes, mostly Thai youths, despite being newcomers having formed in 2018. Since the end of the elections, Future Forward has faced multiple lawsuits and criticism over the legitimacy of its MPs. Actions Thanathorn claims to be politically motivated. On February 21, 2020, the Constitutional Court dissolved Future Forward, ruling that a $6 million loan it received from Thanathorn was a donation, deemed illegal by Thai law. Thanathorn argued the party was given no other opportunity to raise funds to fight the election. Additionally, Thanathorn and members of the Future Forward Executive Committee were also served 10-year bans from politics. This dissolution led to the first wave of protests a few days later, exclusively within education institution grounds across the nation.
Future Forward was able to really express the needs and hopes of young people. Now that party has been dissolved by the courts. As a result, young people have been unable to express themselves in Parliament, and thus they moved to the streets. So they have no other place to go.
These protests stopped when a state of emergency was declared to control the COVID-19 pandemic. However, by July, the protests re-emerged under the Free Youth movement led again by students, this time with 3 demands: the dissolution of parliament, a new constitution, and a stop to threatening citizens and dissidents.
When the protesters started this protest, they came up with 3 demands.
This is Pavin Chachavalpongpan, a Thai scholar currently an associate professor at the Center of Southeast Asian Studies in Kyoto University. In 2014, the junta issued an arrest warrant due to his criticism of the Thai state, and he has sought refuge in Japan since then.
One is the dissolution of the parliament so as to pave the way for fresh election. Second one is the amendment of the constitution, because right now people know that it's not really democratic. In fact, the current charter of Thailand is quite anti-democratic. And the third one is quite interesting as well, because they want the government to seriously investigate abduction and killing, of a Thai dissident overseas.
After the 2014 coup, the number of charges against Thai citizens, especially those opposing the junta, increased significantly. On June 4th, Wanchalam Satsaksit, a Thai activist exiled in Cambodia, was abducted outside his apartment. A trend seen with 8 other Thai dissidents living in Laos and Cambodia since 2014. Wanchalam's disappearance prompted the United Nations and other organizations to urge the Cambodian authorities to investigate his abduction. Cambodia then launched an investigation 5 days later after initially saying it could be fake news. Thailand has yet to look into his disappearance.
There have been up to 9 dissidents living in Laos and Cambodia being either abducted, forcibly disappeared, or killed. The last one happened in June. That was the most, intimidating, not just against other dissidents living overseas, I myself included, but also among the Thai public as well, because the abductee is very young, someone that the younger generation on the street today can relate to. That's why I think that the students today, they said enough is enough.
By August, 10 more demands were made, which includes revoking the lèse majesté law, separating the king's personal and royal assets, and investigating the murders of commentators or critics of the monarchy. Where this crosses the line in Thailand is that the 10 demands go against the lèse majesté law, a law that prohibits the criticism or open discussion about the monarchy and is punishable up to 15 years if the accused is found guilty of defaming, insulting, or threatening the monarchy. The shift from the government to the establishment is what makes these protests distinct and unprecedented. All the other protests Thailand had in the past were about the government of the day and rarely the monarchy.
What makes it really different from the other protests in the past, this is about the call for monarchical reform. All these 10 points are directly related to the monarchy. This is what they think, that if there would be reform, the reform has to go into these 10 points. In Thailand, the issue of the monarchy is very sensitive, if not illegal, to talk about it. Why it is so important to talk about the monarchy? The Thai monarchy sits on top of the political structure. This reform tackling the most important sensitive issue in Thailand.
Thailand is a constitutional monarchy, a change from absolute monarchy rule after a mostly peaceful revolution in 1932. In its context, a constitutional monarchy is a form of government in which a sovereign acts as the head of state within the parameters of a written or unwritten constitution. Political power is shared between the sovereign and a constitutionally organized government, such as a parliament. It means sovereigns can reign without rule by abiding to the limitations of the constitution, which allows democracy to be upheld and the constitutional monarchy to be sustained. But since the junta came into power, several decisions had been made in favor of King Maha Vajiralongkorn. The king was able to voice his opinion on a previously drafted constitution, which had already been accepted in a referendum. This led to an amendment on the power of the monarchy in a new version that is now the 2017 constitution, this time accepted without a referendum. The ownership of Crown Property Bureau, an agency which manages the monarchy's property, was also transferred to the king, granting him full ownership of royal assets worth around $30 billion.
It is ironic, these calls are radical. In the context of constitutional monarchy, this is not radical at all. You're just talking about relocating the monarchy back into the constitution. You assume that you're talking about the role of Queen Elizabeth in the United Kingdom. The Queen has to obey law, Queen has to make her spending transparent. But again, it's a different context. In Thailand, this could be seen as radical because of the nature of the issue that we are talking about. No one before has ever talked about this.
These protests is just an example of what has been boiling over decades, a struggle between the people and the establishment. For example, protests for more than a decade has largely been a tussle between the red shirts and yellow shirts. Red representing the supporters of democracy, beginning with the premiership of Thaksin Shinawatra, the brother of Yingluck, and yellow represents the colours of the monarchy, worn by supporters of the establishment and staunch royalists. With every political crisis and coup, the military is a dominant presence.
The problem with Thailand is the history of politics is in a cycle. It's always elected government, people don't agree, military coup, again and again and again, and that's how it's always been. Thaksin tried to come along and change that, but no, it didn't work. Why? Because above the everyday Thai politics, which includes civil-military relations, you have this asymmetrical partnership of power between the monarchy and military. Elected governance has never been able to effectively challenge this partnership. You do have attempts by elected governments to come to power. They're going to eventually hit this partnership, and there's going to be trouble. That's exactly what happened to Thaksin, and that's what happened to previous coups.
Thailand has witnessed 12 coups since the 1932 revolution. Along the way, protests occurred. And some ending in bloody repression.
We know that in 1976, some Thammasat students were massacred inside the university itself. I hope that it will never happen. For one thing, that the students, they are very courageous. This is the first time that they talk about the real issue facing Thailand. In the past, you would only talk about what went wrong with the government.
Young people are tired of the sort of system their parents and grandparents lived under, in which military and monarchy always dominated. And they see this as a struggle for themselves, but also for their country.
It is this continuous decades-long cycle of political crisis that keeps leading Thailand back to the same situation over and over again. Now, these protesters want to break the decades-long cycle. And with time, it has evolved, like how the initial 3 demands targeted political change, to now targeting a topic that most Thais once never thought of openly discussing.
I think at the beginning that the student wanted to target at Prayut, but since they move on to 10 point and they now targeting at the monarchy, it doesn't mean that Prayut now can get away with things. I just think that the student realize the key problem lie with the monarchy rather than at Prayut Chan-o-cha.
To date, over a dozen individuals, including activists and popular rappers, have been arrested, and more than 60 have been charged with sedition, among others. With the youths on the forefront demanding for change to a system they deem undemocratic, there is a lot at stake for them and many other Thais, as these changes that they want to achieve would not only affect them, but also the next generation.
If there would be any kind of mechanism that would bring about change in Thailand, it has to be these people. That's why, they become responsible group. Their position is that they push the ceiling so high, they push the boundary so far that they would never step back. They want to be in control of their own future. This is about marginalized people, about the underprivileged people fighting against the traditional elites. Even high school students now coming to protest in front of the Ministry of Education already twice. They want to break free, from the traditional thinking. They do not want spoon-fed practice. They want critical thinking.
No matter what happens, Thailand is going to change toward more democracy. If the students are successful in pushing the Prayut government toward more political space, that's good for democracy. But I still think that there will still be a period of chaos which will continue, because in the past, people in Thailand have fought for change, and they've been killed. I think for change to happen really in Thailand, the young people have to be at the forefront, and they have to be willing to sacrifice, in some cases, their lives.